It's going to have to be next man up for the Miami Dolphins at right tackle this season. Austin Jackson on injured reserve, expected to be out for the year, plus a new member of the Miami Dolphins. All of that here today on Locked On Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami, and the NFL Draft lead for the 33rd team. Shout out to our everydayers because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it. Here on the Locked On Network, today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets when you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Big gut punch yesterday from Mike McDaniel, who delivered the news that Austin Jackson, not only was he being placed on injured reserve, it sounds like whatever knee procedure is needed to be done for his current injury situation is expected to be a season-ending variety. Sucks. That's not great. And then you pair that with what right tackle looked like with Kendall Lamm against the Rams, and needless to say, I think there's a number of questions that we need to kind of parse through here on the show as far as what is the options, what is the right decision to make, what is the timeline of that decision. You have a second-round pick in Patrick Paul that is suddenly looking like the back half of this season is going to be a critical piece of the puzzle for you, unless you defer to veteran Kendall Lamm. That's part of the conversation we're going to have. But Austin, I wanted to just talk about the season that he had this season, and I have my grades up here on the other screen that I am looking at as far as like all of the grading that I am doing for the Dolphins this season. Austin Jackson has graded modestly well. I think he's been very consistent in pass protection or in the run game. I think he's been an asset for the Dolphins in that regard. I think the pass protection, everybody goes back to that week 2 game against Buffalo where Von Miller tagged him in the manner in which he did. And I think it's totally fair to say that was not a good performance for Austin Jackson. That's always kind of been the book on Austin Jackson, was true pass sets and being left on islands and having to take vertical pass sets where I got to get into my kick drive and I got to get 5-7 yards landmark and frame a guy, and then I got to be able to protect against a two-way go. It's just never really been the root of where he has been successful as a player. And this scheme has brought out a better version of Austin Jackson than the one that we got, bless him, in the 2020, 2021 seasons of Austin Jackson, right? And then 2022, we saw very little of Austin because of injuries. So you feel for Austin in that regard, where he obviously earned the contract extension last season. And after a rough start against Buffalo in week 2, I actually thought he had pieced together a pretty solid stretch of games. When I review my grading week over week, and it's nice to be able to see the trends, Austin played his worst game of the season in week 2, and then was fairly underwhelming the rest of the games before the bye. Against Tennessee in week 4, I thought he played well against Seattle, but then in week 4 and week 5, he floated just barely above like standard expectation based on what he was asked to do on every play by play over the course of an entire game. But I will say this, week 5, the New England game, was better than week 4. And then week 7 was better than week 5, and you were on a bye in week 6. And then week 8 was better than week 7. And then week 9 was better than week 8. He was trending on an upward trend this season. And of course, you contrast that with getting your starting quarterback back for that Arizona game the last 2 weeks. It was really encouraging to see. And in the run game, with how they leaned into the run game, Austin was a straw that stirred some of that drink a little bit. So I think that's where his absence is totally going to be felt, because I view the strengths of the next man up, that being Kendall Lamm, as kind of the inverse. I think Kendall's a little bit better in just your authentic pass protection. He doesn't have the raw power and movement skills and uproot ability that Austin Jackson has. And you felt that against the Rams. So it's kind of leaves you in this awkward limbo. Austin, we will see next year. That it feels like a very easy contract restructure situation for the Dolphins. He's not owed big money. I'll go ahead and pull up the formal terms of his contract, but he's in the first year of a 3-year, $36 million contract extension, which for the play that he's giving, he's only 25 years old. Like he's really probably not even, he's in the prime of his career, like athletically with what he's capable of being, but he's maybe got another decade worth of NFL play under his belt for as long as the Dolphins want to have him, and it makes sense with him being a fit. But he's in year one of the extension now. Was on the books this year for $4.5 million in cap space, while from a cash perspective, you received $8.5 million in cash this year. That's really good money for an offensive tackle that can do the things that Austin Jackson can do as a scheme-specific starter. Do I think Austin Jackson is a universal player that would go to any offensive system in the NFL and be a quality starter? No, but I think the trend and the trajectory of the last month of play for Austin, when you pair it with last year, this is a sustainable, you know what you're going to get type of performer when he's on the field. If you're down 3 touchdowns in the second half of a game, yeah, he's probably going to get teed off on a little bit. But this is a loss for the Dolphins. This is a big gut punch. Now, next year, he's owed $11.5 million in cash in year 2 of his 3-year, $36 million contract extension. From a cap perspective, he's going to be on the books for about $13.8 million in cap, but you can restructure that, and we'll get into a salary cap conversation way down the road, but there's a lot more flexibility at hand for them this year than there was last year from a salary cap perspective, and not having like your big free up dollars like Xavier Howard. Like you don't have to wait right now to access some of that money. So I think it changes what your early season plan can look like, especially if you aren't going to try to game the system on compensatory picks again, which I don't think would be the worst thing in the world, because some of your answers being players that were cut, there was some success out of that, but there was also some failure out of that. So that's a conversation for the day, but Austin Jackson would expect him to be here next year, would expect him to get a restructure. They don't even have to add like any new years as void years on the back end of the contract, and they can save, it's about $6 million in cap space that they could save. So you're talking about a starting right tackle that's a really good scheme fit that'll probably be on the books for you somewhere between $7 and $8 million, unless they choose to restructure less. So that's where Austin Jackson stands individually. The plan at right tackle moving forward, I think, is a fascinating one. We're going to talk about that next year on this episode of Locked On Dolphins, so make sure that you stick with us. You can get ready to tackle all of the NFL action this weekend with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view the live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page is where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet at FanDuel.com. As of right now, Dolphins, this line's actually moved up. The Dolphins now favored by 7.5 points against the Raiders in Week 11. So if you're feeling that, you can go for it. You can get it Dolphins minus 7.5 at minus 110 out at the payout. Maybe you like the game total. It's over under 44.5 points. I do not expect the Raiders to score a ton. So that's just something for you to leave in the back of your mind as you get ready to decide what kind of action you want to get going over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. If you're looking for a different way to get in on the action this weekend, PrizePicks is the best place for real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, PrizePicks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 player stat projections for a shot to win up to 100 times your money. Run your game all season long on PrizePicks. PrizePicks also offers an injury insurance policy. So if one of your guys goes down in the first half of a game and does not come back, PrizePicks will keep your lineup live. You can now win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct bets. And PrizePicks now offers Venmo for quick and easy deposits and withdrawals into your account this sports season. You can sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play your first $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It is guaranteed. PrizePicks, you can go download the app today, use code LOCKEDONNFL, get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Let's download the app today, use code LOCKEDONNFL, get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. So the plan moving forward, I think there's a line or a needle to thread here as far as this week and long term. I think those are two different conversations because you played a Rams team that had a lot of young players up front, that had a lot of heavy-handed guys. They had some dynamic athletes on the edge. Jared Verse looks outstanding for the Rams. He's going to be a Pro Bowl caliber player. And to be fair, I know Dolphins fans are a little sour about everything with the team right now. Just remember Jared Verse was off the board before the Dolphins picked, and Chop Robinson played probably his best game as a pro against the Rams as well. But you look at the Raiders and who they have and who they don't have, and you ask yourself, what is the strength of these players? The Raiders edge group has Max Crosby, marquee pass rusher. And that has Tyree Wilson, Caleb Chason, Janarius Robinson, Charles Snowden. Some names, man, as a draft guy, I haven't seen some of these names in quite some time. The most important piece of this puzzle is they have Max Crosby, who is an elite of the elite NFL pass rusher. So the challenge the Dolphins have to ask themselves is you've got Kendall Lamm, who's a better pass protector than he is a run blocker. And you have Patrick Paul, who is a rookie second-round draft pick who's played left tackle exclusively his entire career at Houston. And I know he's been in practice getting some reps cross-training at right tackle. I think that's smart. I think that would have been smart anyway. But it's a totally different ballgame when you put him into a game and ask him to play it. In my opinion, if you're going to let Patrick Paul play right tackle for you for the upside in the run game, I think that probably needs to come starting next week, not this week. I would not want to put Patrick Paul out there to block Max Crosby in his first career start in college or pros on the right side of the offensive line. I'm not interested in doing that. I'd rather have the pass protection upside and just know, hey, if we're going to run the ball, we're going to try to get double teams on Crosby, who's not a big player. We can help with the tight end. Hopefully we get Alec Ingold back so that can kind of change your combinations of players to be the F or H back or in the backfield to kind of give you some extra leverage. That's, for me, that's the most favorable solution. And then you get into playing New England. You traded Josh Uche, who's arguably their most dynamic pass rusher, to the Chiefs. And now it's Anthony Jennings, who's a good player, but he doesn't have the same juice as Max Crosby. And it's Keon White, who's a big, long, powerful player, but I think that matches pretty well against what Pat has. And Dietrich Weiss, who's kind of the same thing. Now, they did claim Yannick Ngakoue off of waivers. So that's a matchup I'd be a little leery of, but Ngakoue is not in the same stratosphere as what Max Crosby is. And then the week after that is the Green Bay Packers, of course, on Thanksgiving, where it's Rashawn Gary, Lucas Van Ness, Brenton Cox, Kingsley Enikbare. Like, I just feel like those two lineups, especially if you've been cross-training, Pat, but now you got to really ramp them up to play right tackle, I'd be in no rush to do it this week. That's my personal opinion based off of the respect I have for Max Crosby and wanting a guy who's been out there and done it before, even if it means some shortcomings in the core principles of what you're trying to do offensively. And I think Kendall Lamm is a much better player than what he showcased against the Rams. I know it's year 10 for him. This is expected to be his last year. He got some tough draws with young, heavy-handed, like 280-pound, like super explosive guys. Nevertheless, I would place my bets there and not want the first shock of the system for Patrick Paul to come at right tackle. Now, whether the team agrees with that or not, maybe they covet the run game stuff and they feel like they can offset Max Crosby with running the ball at him. And if that's the plan and they go Patrick Paul, okay, we'll see how it goes, right? Like everything we're doing right now is a performance evaluation and a performance assessment in every way, shape, and form. And that includes your internal evaluations of the players on the roster and who you feel is well suited to do what and what you choose to do with them. So it's not just play calling. It's not just execution of the players out there. It's what positions you're putting what players in to be successful and what you're asking them to do. So I'm fascinated to figure out how they choose to do it, what decision they choose to make, what they feel is best for the football team. I just gave you my perspective based off having watched Kendall Lamm, knowing the shortcomings there and knowing how hard it can be to have to play on the other side of the line. As I think about long term, I do get a little leery thinking about the picture now with Teron Armstead because Teron is playing some of the best ball of his career. Now, he played his second worst graded game of the season that I had after missing the Tennessee game. The Rams was his second worst game of the season for my grades. But he was off the charts against the Colts. He was off the charts against the Cardinals. He was off the charts the second game against the Bills. He's played really well this year. Obviously, availability is a big talking point for Teron Armstead. And if there's an interruption there, the question then becomes, okay, how do you balance Kendall? What side does he play? Do you move Patrick back to the left side? I'm hoping we don't have to figure that out. I'm hoping this succession plan can be as simple as let's play this season. Let's take the short-term bridge with Lamb. Let's take the long-term ramp up with Patrick Paul, and Kendall Lamm can still be your swing tackle. That's the perfect world, but as we know, it's not a perfect world, and the Dolphins have lived quite a bit of not perfect world this season. But they did make a move yesterday. They added linebacker Tyrel Dodson off of waivers from Seattle, former Buffalo Bill. We're going to talk about who he is as a player, what I think it means for this team that's next year on Locked On Dolphins, so stick with us. Dolphins fans, you remember our great partner, Ultimate Pro Football GM. They're back. They've added an amazing new game mode that I want to tell you guys about. The game that had you step into the shoes of a football franchise GM and lead it to glory now has a head coach career mode as well. So on top of getting to build a dynasty by drafting players, signing free agents, and hiring a coaching staff, you now get to call offensive plays during the game as well. Additionally, you'll dig new tools that you can work with, such as individual training camps, upgraded negotiation systems for contracts. So this fun, realistic game just got a whole lot better. If you already have the game installed, make sure you update it so you can try out the new game mode. And if you don't have it yet, you can download it right now. It's a must-have for all football fans. I love it. I love that you can play it on the go. It's completely free. There's no ads. It's 100% playable offline. I like to use it on the airplane. And here's a special offer for Locked On fans. You can use promo code LOCKEDONNFL in all caps inside the game store to receive a free boost to your franchise. Make sure to get it, as this perk will jumpstart your play and give you the advantage you'll want in creating a dynasty. Download the game, go to ultimate-gm.com, ultimate-gm.com, or look it up in the app stores. Ultimate Pro Football GM. Start your dynasty today. The Dolphins did some GMing of their own yesterday, claiming linebacker Tyrel Dodson off of waivers. He was cut by the Seahawks. Now, as far as why he was cut by the Seahawks, I don't know. It's a good question. But what I can tell you about Tyrel Dodson is that he has been a very productive tackling player for them. And tackles are a little bit of a hollow stat. He's first on the team in combined tackles. He's second on the team in solo tackles. He is tied for second on the team for Seattle with tackles for loss at 5. This is a player that, as you watch on film, because that's why today's show is a little bit later, as I've been working on grinding some tape, ironically enough, for Tyrel Dotson. He hadn't really left the field. He's played over 600 snaps offensively. And he's not overly active as a pressure player, but he's a fairly reliable tackler. He's not overly impactful in coverage. And it makes me think about Anthony Walker. And the complementary style of play that he's had with Jordan Brooks that I haven't necessarily seen with David Long. David Long, some of his shortcomings this season have been instincts in zone coverage. So then they tried to mask that a little bit by where they'd have David pressuring quite a bit, trying to play forward and pressure a bit, with mixed results. But it was more about trying to limit that player in space. And then they make the transition to Anthony Walker, who's not as dynamic as David is, but he's a little bit more reliable. He's a little bit better with the run fits. But he is a player who I think lacks a certain bounce as an older linebacker. So I think this addition of Tyrel Dodson strikes me, as I watched him on film, as another option in complementary role to maybe work with, platoon with Anthony Walker. Because it really strikes me as he wins in some of the same kinds of ways. I think he moves a little bit better. I think he can give you some more of the pressure stuff that you're missing with Walker because he doesn't have the same juice as what David Long does when you want to pressure off the second level. And Jordan Brooks is so dynamic in space and so long in space that you want to keep him in space. And to pick him up off of waivers and to owe him, it's about $1.5 million in cash the rest of the season. I mean, that's next to nothing. It's very little. If players were on minimum salaries, you'd be talking about picking up like $600,000-$700,000. So it's a couple $100,000 at the end of the day, more than what like a minimum player that you could have signed off the street or signed for minimum would be. And a player that I think makes a lot of sense within what they have found in the role for Anthony Walker, but maybe he's not as complete of a player on paper as what you had in David Long. So I think this is maybe the bridge of the gap between what David brought from a movement skills perspective and from a striking perspective, not necessarily a consistency of tackling perspective, because the missed tackles have killed David this year, and Walker as kind of more of a cerebral, reliable player. This is really only the second year that Dotson has played meaningful snaps. He played meaningful snaps for Buffalo, started 10 games for them last year, played 550 snaps. He's played more defensive snaps this year through 9 games than he has in any of his first 4 seasons in the NFL as a defensive player combined. The other thing he does, he plays a lot of special teams. He played 275 plus snaps for the Bills in 2 of his last 3 seasons with the Bills team. And then he gets elevated a little bit more of a defensive player. The special team snaps comes down, dips to 184. So is this a platoon with some special teams opportunities? I hope so. The way the Dolphins made room for this, they put Tanner Connor on injured reserve. Can we just be done with this experiment, please? Because we're on year 3. Tanner played 2 snaps against the Rams in week 10, threw a good block out on the edge and then got hurt, and then he came back in for victory formation at the end of the game. So that's kind of where I'm at with Tyrel Dodson. I think it's a really interesting ad. I'm interested to see how he kind of builds in down the stretch to rotate within, or is he just a special teams guy because he's got a robust level of experience doing that? To be determined. But you can keep it locked in right here on Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day. I appreciate you guys, as always, for checking out the show. Find us on YouTube, wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. I'm Kyle Krabs, and I am out of here.